Welcome everyone to the Center for Higher Education's inaugural Heads and Chairs webinar. And thanks to all of you for joining us. I know it's a busy, uncertain, and challenging time. This is our first opportunity to run a webinar in this format. And while we've had a few dry runs, we do hope that you'll bear with us should we have any glitches. I'm Kathleen Matheos from the Center for Higher Education Research and Development. I'm moderating the session and joined by two presenters, Valene from University of Saskatchewan and Jonathan Malloy from Carleton University. Both bring extensive lived chair experiences to the table. Just a little bit about the format. We have some questions that we'll be giving the various two presenters to begin with, and then we'll open it up for questions for you. We ask that you disable your video and mute your audio and add your questions in the chat format. I'll curate the questions to the speakers and I'll ensure that we've got enough time left for your questions. For your information, the session will be recorded and archived to serve as a resource, and we'll provide you with the link. I'd also like to really thank and acknowledge Tara De Castro, who organized the webinar and from whom you've received your messages and who has been letting people in through the lobby and work through our new system. She's really supported us through the process, and without her contributions, we wouldn't have been able to deliver this webinar. Finally, I will be sending you a short feedback form, actually coming shortly after the webinar, and we'd really appreciate your input and suggestions for future programming in the idea of continuously improving. So without further ado, I think I'll begin the first questions. So the first question is for Valene. Can you give me some idea of what challenges chairs face during COVID-19?
Great. So thank you very much, Kathleen. So you've only given us an hour here, so I'll focus on some very specific challenges. But before I do, I just want to thank the Center for Higher Education Research and Development for hosting this event, and also everyone who is attending this event. I know that everyone who is a department chair or department head, whatever your institution calls the position, but whoever's working in these roles right now has a lot going on, and it can very much feel like this constant game of whack-a-mole, and so the fact that that people are taking the time for this today is very appreciated. So right now I am in the last few months of my first term as chair. I'm at the University of Saskatchewan, and our terms here are 5 years long. And so during my time as chair, I've gotten used to experiencing a lot of change. But I will say that that obviously these circumstances take the idea of change to a new level. And it's actually, I find it kind of funny. Not in a haha funny way, but just last term I deliberately made extremely busy for myself because I thought I could take this term to just kind of relax into my research leave, and that hasn't actually proven to be the case. So the things that I think are particular challenges for department chairs during this period, there's a couple of things that I find really challenging. And the first is that as a department chair, you're really in this weird middle zone, this in-between zone between sort of being a faculty member and leading a department and being at that level, but you're also this liaison to the faculty or college and to the university, and so there's this sort of point person role. In that we're communicating information and decisions up and down, but on a lot of the decisions that need to be made, they're being made at much higher levels than the department level, and so there's this real challenge of figuring out this balance between over communicating with people, like, hi everybody, we're still here and nothing's new, hope you're good, and also under communicating, which is that we don't want to be absent. And so finding this middle ground, I think, is a real challenge. A second I've noticed, and I've heard from my my chair colleagues, has to do with figuring out virtual leadership, because one of the biggest roles for a department chair, in my opinion, is to set the tone for the department and to really foster the department culture and to make the group feel like a team. It's much easier with face-to-face interactions than it is with these virtual interactions. And faculty and instructors, they all have very different life circumstances right now, and so arranging for department meetings, all these things present particular challenges, because some faculty literally cannot go 5 minutes without someone tugging at the corner of their sweater. And so we have to be very conscious of that. And at the same time, maintain that's the reality of being a department. And then the last thing I'll note is that there's this weird juxtaposition in that we're in crisis and in routine at the exact same time. So everything's different, everything's changed, but all the regular deadlines and all the regular paperwork still applies. It still needs to be done. And so we need to sort of manage change and continuity at the same time. And I think those are some particular challenges.
Okay, over to Jonathan. Chairs play an intermediary role between the department, including its student, staff, and faculty, and more senior administration. How can chairs best play that role during the times of crisis?
Okay, all right. Well, I also thanks to CHERD for sponsoring this webinar. I'm also very glad to be here and be able to talk to everyone here about that. And I mean, in terms of how can chairs best play that role, particularly the intermediary role with departments? I mean, Valene touched on a lot of that stuff there. I think that as every chair really knows, though, that often it's really their responsibility, whether they ask for it or not, to translate a lot of the university policies and issues and decisions into ways that make sense to their particular discipline, their particular program, in short, their particular reality. So they have we might an intermediary or a translator function almost, I think, in trying to interpret. How does this policy apply to my program, to my discipline, my particular practices, both in terms of leading the department and then also explaining the information to colleagues, to faculty, to staff, to students. And so chairs, I mean, I think an important thing to say about chairs is that most department chairs didn't necessarily ask for the job in the first place, and suddenly they're put into this role. And I'm sure that whether you're a dean or university president or anything, but you're perhaps maybe rethinking right now, whether you really wanted to have this job after all. But for department chairs, I think a lot of them said, I didn't really ask for this job in routine times, and now I've got this sort of crisis management role going on here. And so that's very challenging. And I think, unfortunately, something I'm hearing speaker feedback here. But so chairs, I think, are best equipped to explain really sort of a lot of what's going on at the university level, to translate policies and things to faculty, staff, and students. I think particularly as we move to online teaching, and I think chairs already found that back in March and April, chairs have this crucial role in directing faculty, directing staff, students to the resources for teaching online, in many cases learning from scratch there. So again, chairs aren't necessarily the only people, but they're the ones really at the apex of the unit, and usually have a very crucial role in explaining how things work for that particular unit or that particular discipline. So triaging information in that way. But I'd also say it's the other way around. It's not just telling faculty things. I think it's also bringing information up to deans, to senior administrators in various ways. And I phrase it really sort of as raising issues constructively to senior administrators who are doing so much planning now on the run, trying to figure out, trying to adapt to things there. And I mean, no one is omniscient. No one can predict all the different ways that a policy might implicate or have how it might resonate in various ways. And again, chairs often have that role to be able to say to deans or vice presidents or whoever there, here's a very important aspect of my program or my discipline or the research that my colleagues do that I don't think it's going to apply in a certain way. I mean, you can think of all sorts of possible things there. But again, so that's what I mean by it's a two-way role of information. It's both, I think, translating sort of edicts on high into things that people can use in their teaching and work. But also, I think voicing things the other way is very crucial, saying, hey, this is not going to work for my unit, or here's something very important. Have you considered this, etc.? And I mean, obviously try and do that in a constructive way, but I think that's really, really crucial. So you're really filtering information both ways, and I think often sort of absorbing information. Some trying to figure what needs to be raised to higher levels, and also what needs to be passed on. So as one chair said to me, not all please forward to your faculty emails actually need to be forwarded. So sometimes the chair has a really important value-added role there, I think, in trying to figure out what information really needs to be passed on. A couple of things I might say. One I think is people issues, and I think we want to talk a lot about people issues here today. But and chairs are often usually not formal managers. They're not management. They're usually in the union bargaining unit or in the faculty association. So they may not have formal roles there. But particularly in this really weird time, they know their people best. And everyone has been thrown off by this. Everyone's lost in some way. They're out of routine. Normal processes don't apply. And chairs are really at the level where they can know reasonably, they know their people, know their faculty, know their staff, perhaps be in touch with their students, depending on the program and size there. So they're the best suited to really understand how people are coping and how to respond. Doesn't mean that chairs can solve everything, but chairs, I think, are really important frontline people managers in this situation, even more than they already have been, because everything's a bit off. All routines and people are a bit off that way. So that's something I think that is really important in being that intermediary role there. And I think just the final thing I'll say is simply that I think chairs have a role that senior administrators don't, in terms of sort of, let's call it, authenticity and connection. I think a lot of faculty and staff and students perhaps are, let's say they're a little skeptical of senior administration. I'll just leave it at that. And chairs generally do have much more of an authenticity. They have much more of a more legitimacy, I think, with colleagues in terms of information, what they hear. And I think so. Again, it's important to. This is all very hard. It's not time to sort of fake. It's not time to sort of fake optimism, to be the cheerleader all the time. You can't do that. But I think chairs, again, in all this information role, I think really have an authenticity in a frontline role that I think senior administrators don't have. And so I think chairs can really, if they can find a way to sort of to help empower people to try and be realistic, be optimistic if they can, and all that. But again, to use that authenticity in a way that ultimately helps things. I think that's a key part of that intermediary role that chairs have between senior administration, faculty, and staff and students.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. And I just wanted to add to the group, if you have questions as you were going through, please put them in the chat box and I'll curate them so that when we finish this short discussion, we can then turn to your questions so that we can ask them. I had a question for Valene. Valene, you're known for your attention to students and teaching. What's the chair's role in looking after the interests of the students as we prepare for a possible fall remote or uncertain kind of term?
Right. Thanks, Kathleen. Well, for some of us, it's not a possible remote fall term. Increasingly, just this week, we're seeing a lot of Canadian universities state explicitly that we are having a remote fall term, and I think there's a few things that department chairs can be doing. The first has to do with that intermediary role that Jonathan mentioned, and that is that it's really important to ensure that that as a chair that you are advocating on behalf of your faculty and your contract instructors. The reality is that transitioning to remote learning is not simply oh, well, I'm going to do everything that I usually do in the classroom, and I'm going to do it in front of a camera. I'm someone who has taught online and face, and true online teaching is not the same at all. And so making sure that that faculty understand this, but also making sure that senior administration understands what they are asking of faculty, what they are asking of contract instructors, and making sure that these individuals have the support that they need. Now, what I am seeing happen is that different parts of universities seem to be doing a very good job of trying to pull together resources. So, for example, my university, the distance education unit, and the teaching and learning center, and the library, all these units are trying to pull resources together as quickly as possible and make them available to faculty. But the reality is it's still going to be a lot of work for everyone over the summer to prepare for solid classes for the fall. This is work that's going to cut into faculty and contract instructors' normal family time and personal lives. For faculty, that have responsibilities with respect to research, whose job performance is evaluated in large part on research. This is going to cut into their ability on that front. So making sure that their needs are being really clearly communicated up as much as possible is something I think that chairs can do. And it's in the interests of students because we want students to have the best possible remote term that they can. And so supporting faculty, supporting contract instructors is a way to support students. Second thing I would say is that, and this will turn it around and say this is the communication from the department chair to the department, is it's really important that faculty and contract instructors really understand what we're asking of them. That we are not asking them to just provide their same old class as before in front of a screen or with voice over PowerPoint. We're asking them to do something else entirely. And they really need to understand what quality remote, and I won't call it online because online is something that has a lot more time and development, but what a quality remote learning experience might be. And so I think there's an important role for department chairs to play in organizing workshops within the department through whatever video technology might be there, providing resources, and clearly communicating expectations. And I'd suggest that chairs might want to get creative and innovative in doing so. One of my rules for myself and for my department, my faculty, I'm sure are sick of hearing it at this point, but I always ask, well, if this were easy, what would this look like? And what would we do if we could make this easy? And so if this were easy, we'd have other people doing the work. Well, good news. The distance education units, the teaching and learning units, they're actually willing to do these things. So it's possible for departments, at least in my institution, to organize some kind of departmental workshop, invite the distance or teaching and learning people to come make a presentation and pose questions. It's also possible to work with other departments and other units to have larger sessions if it makes sense. I actually have a good friend at another university, and our departments are kind of working together. And last week we co-hosted a session between the two departments, same discipline, so similar teaching topics, well, same teaching topics. And it was a really useful exercise. We had it scheduled for an hour and a half, and at the end we were trying to kick people out because they wanted to keep talking. The last thing I'll mention in terms of looking after the interests of students is to communicate with students when and how you can from your role as department head. And this can be challenging because we still struggle to know how to communicate with students. At my university, students aren't required to declare a major, and so knowing exactly who our students are is tricky. Event talking to a student, and he said he was in our international studies program, and I said, well, have you declared your major? And he said, well, I've declared it in my heart. And I said, well, declaring it in your heart doesn't mean that I can email you, so I don't have you on my list if you don't declare. And so communicating with students is a bit of a challenge, and so sort of working with your administration and office staff to try to make this work is something that I think is important for graduate students. For the undergraduate students, I've sent emails. We're trying to figure things out with social media. I'm not sure. I don't know where the kids are at these days with respect to social media. I'm not going to do a TikTok, but figuring out what can work for you, I think is something that's really important.
Okay, moving over to Jonathan now. Again, department chairs usually have a role in mentoring and supporting faculty and instructors, including sessional contingent instructors. How can this be done effectively during the time of COVID-19?
Well, I mean, that's a big question, obviously, and I think it's again a crucial role is the people aspect of being a chair. I think anyone sort of watching this webinar has probably become really aware of that, and I think mentoring and supporting is always important. I'd say I'd start by saying that in this pandemic, everything is different. Faculty needs are going to differ. I think everyone's really lost in some way or another, and not always in the usual way. So just for example, when it comes to moving to remote online learning, junior faculty might be more adept at doing that, and you might have some previously very low maintenance senior faculty that were always really good that are completely lost at sea, that don't know what to do there. You might have some very resilient mid-career people that are suddenly really overwhelmed by care responsibilities and things. So I think everyone has needs in different ways. And again, a lot of the sort of more conventional patterns don't necessarily apply. I think no one's immune. And again, a chair can't solve all these issues and all that. But as I said earlier, I think a chair is a really important frontline role. Because they are really the person in the university best positioned to know people and have a role in reaching out to them. So a few things. I think a very big thing is checking in. I think talking to chairs. Chairs have already said that this is a high priority. Is to check in with people in this new remote environment, and that means reaching out to everyone. Sending information to faculty, things, reaching out away there, but also offering specific support to individuals that you think might need it, and generally having sort of, as Valene said earlier, trying to balance, oversharing of information with making sure that no one falls through the cracks at all. And so I think trying to find ways to do that, to make sure that you're reaching out to people, that you're making sure that you're not losing anyone without inundating them, I think is a fine line to walk. Some specific suggestions. I know one thing that some chairs are doing is having sort of drop-in office hours remotely on Zoom or another platform. Simply telling your faculty or staff or students or whoever is appropriate, just having a drop-in on Tuesday afternoons. You can drop in and we can discuss any department business. That's just one idea that some people are doing. Another person told me they always have no obligation emails to faculty when they send things. They always say, you don't have to reply. There's no need to follow up, just if you're interested there. So giving people the option of what to do there. Another thing that people are doing, I think, is they're abandoning video and Zoom and stuff, and just using the old-fashioned telephone to talk to people, saying, we don't need to have a Zoom meeting. Let's just talk on the phone in some way, because I think almost everyone is quite zoomed out at this point there. So a lot of different ways to give people different options for reaching out. I think, and again, you're not going to reach everyone. All that. Some people are going to be very stoic and say, "Oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine there." Some people just may not want to open up and stuff there. And again, a chair can only go so far. You're not there to solve everyone's problems all the time, but giving people different options of reaching out, and letting them reach out, I think, is very important in various ways. I think when you look at specific categories of people, I think obviously a key thing I'm sure chairs think about is mentoring particularly junior and pre-tenured faculty. Most institutions, I think, have extended their tenure clocks in various ways now, which does give a breather. But I suspect for a lot of junior faculty, for pre-tenured faculty, that just creates new stresses. Kind of, if my research program is not proceeding at all here, I've got an extra year, but I don't know what I'm doing next year. I have no idea there. So there's a lot of new stresses there. And again, a chair is not going to have the answers usually. But often they've got an important role, I think, in listening to people, in trying to have some sort of supportive role, mentoring them to the extent that they can. Because like I said, everyone is thrown off in different ways. For contract instructors, I think that's, again, a crucial issue. And I think that's something which in normal times, I think chairs should always have an important role there in trying to mentor contract instructors to the extent that CIs want to have attention to try and sort of figure out what they need, give them advice in various ways there and supporting them in that. Now, of course, it's even more important. I think from what I can tell, like it really varies in institutions, really what's happening with contract faculty. I think in some institutions, the contract instructor budget has been the first one to go. So there are very few CI positions, so there's a big impact there. I think some others are actually probably relying more on their contract instructors because those were the people that were delivering a lot of the online courses previously. So my read is that it actually varies with institutions. But some contract instructors are really impacted with a lack of work. Others not so much. But either way, I think there's a very important role there for chairs to look out for contract instructors, to support them. And this is where I get back to earlier the intermediary role. I think chairs have a really crucial role here, making sure that contract instructors don't get lost in the shuffle. Because I think with a lot of scenario planning and all the crisis planning that's going on now, universities, they're going to focus on their full-time employees and their students. And contract instructors are often a category that gets overlooked or cut or just maybe isn't thought about. And I'm not trying to knock people who are trying to make decisions on the run here, but I think CIs are one of the most vulnerable populations that can easily be overlooked. And often, again, that's where I think the chair does have a role, I think, in speaking upward, speaking some truth to power, and making sure that, for example, CIs have access to the same online resources and training that regular faculty have. Just little things like that. There's all kinds of things like that you might be able to think of for your institution, where the chair might have a role in saying, like, hey, do contract instructors have access to this? Or contract instructors, they're being asked to do this extra work. Is there some extra payment for them or something? There are various things you might be able to do. The main thing is to at least raise these concerns. Make sure that people above you are thinking of them. So push back for contract instructors, both for their own needs and also, frankly, for the good of your students in your program, because you want to put on the best teaching program you can. That includes your contract teaching faculty. One thing I'll just say is that the question is about faculty and contract instructors. I'll also say about staff is a big role, again, for chairs who oversee whether it's administrative staff, technical lab staff. There's all kinds of individuals there, and that's going to be a different environment for various people. I think some staff seem to be resilient quite well. For others, their work can't really be done remotely from home. It's a big issue there. And again, there's all sorts of combinations there. I won't sort of get into them too much there, but again, generally the chair is the supervisor of those individuals, and I know that's been a big challenge for chairs to work with people who are used to reporting and are used to a very set routine. They're used to working in the office. Most faculty are often used to working at home. Staff are used to an office routine and environment there, and the chair, I think, has a very important role there in trying to maintain continuity and direction as much as they can, but it can be very, very challenging that way. And a last thing I want to say about sort of personnel issues also is that, unfortunately, this is also time when it's really difficult to let's say, to monitor performance and deal with issues, disciplinary issues or performance issues, because in this scenario, we're all working under unusual conditions. We can't have the same expectations of people we normally do. But I do know that certainly some chairs are finding that to be a real challenge, that they don't have the normal disciplinary tools for staff. They're not quite sure what they can reasonably ask of people, but the work has to be done. There does need to be expectations and standards. And again, that's a tricky issue. Now, I Ideally, HR departments are doing their best to support people in that way. There's no simple solution there. But I just want to raise that's another big issue of the people management role of chairs in all of this. It's so multifaceted, and again, everyone's thrown off in some way. The normal rules don't fully apply, and chairs have to do their best to try and adapt to all of that.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Valene, I know from your Twitter activity that you're regularly discussing issues of gender and equity in the academy and the importance of work-life balance. What does it look like at this particular time for department chairs?
So my feeling is generally on these issues is that one of the things we have to do as department chairs is try to start always from a place of empathy and compassion, and I think that's more true now than it's ever been, and I think this applies to how we deal with other people and also with ourselves. And as department chairs, I feel very strongly that we need to be setting the tone and role modeling the behavior that we want. And part of that, in my opinion, is setting a tone that looking after ourselves, that having our faculty, students, staff look after themselves is a priority. That we're in this. This is not going to be done soon. This is a marathon here. It's not going to be a sprint, and so people need to look out for themselves, including department chairs. So I do think that for anyone who has not yet established really firm boundaries on work time, that this is perhaps the time that they really should decide to do so. That weekends, even though every day can seem like every other day, that weekends should matter, evenings should matter, and because it's very easy to work this job all the time, or I guess it depends on institutions, but in my experience, it would be very easy for me to do so if I wanted to. I don't think that helps anybody. And so I think that work-life balance is going to be a challenge. Some department chairs are still trying to, they're still working towards promotion, and so they're trying to manage their research goals while they're trying to manage their departments. All these types of things, and no one will protect that time for you except for you. And so I'd say that's the really important thing. I do very much believe that we bring our best selves to whatever we're doing when we're rested, and when we're taking care of ourselves. And so I would very much say that this is a particular challenge for department chairs right now, is to make sure that they are living this, and I also suggest that this might be a time where department chairs get really good at asking for help if there's things that they can delegate to other people, that this is a great time to do this. If there's other parts of the university that could be helping, again, it goes back to that question of, well, if this were easy, someone else would do it. Is there someone in the dean's office who could handle something? Is the deadline that you're working towards actually a real deadline? And that can be the type of thing that can be useful to explore. The last thing I'd note is that because we're very virtual now, we're cut off from other people, and so that can be a real challenge. That sort of interaction with other department chairs is an important part of being a department chair, and we're not doing this in the same extent. So there's a real need, I think, to establish community with other chairs.
Okay, thanks, Lolene. And turning to you, Jonathan, in addition to having been a department chair for a significant period of time, you're also a member of your university's Board of Governors. Having served in these two roles, What have you learned at the university level that would be helpful for chairs to know at this time?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, as Aline said earlier, I mean, what we really we scheduled this webinar a week or two ago, but this is the week when a lot of Canadian universities are really starting to release their fall planning, or at least some guidelines for their fall planning. And that, of course, that's been work that's been going on for, well, since March, obviously, and that university administrations are spending an enormous amount of time trying to plan for the fall. And the complexity of that planning is just staggering. Obviously, the core business of the university is teaching, and we know that it's going to move to a largely remote environment at most Canadian universities. It varies a bit, but generally universities are moving in that direction. But it's just amazing the amount of scenarios, the complexity of universities, and the fact that really it's so hard to plan when you don't really know any of the variables. I mean, you don't know how the pandemic is going to evolve. You don't know what your local jurisdiction's rules are going to be. You don't know what the reaction of students and parents are going to be to showing up in the fall. You don't know if international students will want to come, and you don't know whether they'll be able to get visas to come. So you don't know what your tuition revenue is going to be. You don't know what your public finance is going to be. Some provinces we've seen the cuts are already starting, and others not yet. We'll see there. There's so many scenarios that are going on. There's so many parts of the scenario that universities just don't know. In fact, the move to remote teaching is probably the most predictable thing that's going on. That part of the core business, but all sorts of other, particularly whether research labs will be open and going. That's obviously a big concern for faculty in departments. We don't really know what's going to happen there, and just the sheer number combination. That's why I will say, like, just my exposure to different parts of the university, it's amazing that things that I hadn't really thought about that have to be considered in a scenario, particularly of reopening a university in that way. And the one thing that universities do generally know is they know the costs that are coming, particularly the salary costs of the university, but they have really no idea what's coming in for revenue, particularly tuition revenue, and that's a big concern. We do see, depending on institutions, we see some of course are already bringing in cuts, and so some chairs may be going through those already and not there. So the point being simply that no one really knows. In fact, the move to remote learning is probably the most concrete at this point. Excuse me. And I think so in this environment is where I get back to what I was saying there about the role of the chairs as intermediaries. I think chairs do have this really useful two-way role, both in trying to explain some of these complexities to faculty, staff, and students in a way that's relevant to them, that giving them news they can use, but then also making sure that their perspective is in that scenario planning. And every university is doing it a little differently in how they're planning for scenarios and things there. They're generally consulting in some way, at least, and that's where chairs, I think, can really play a constructive role in saying, just to be clear, this part of my program, or this issue in my research labs, like that, this particular internship we have here, like all these things there, whatever it is, making sure that it's being considered. And again, there's all sorts of voices going on, there's all sorts of inputs going on, so I think you have to be constructive and succinct to what you're saying there. But I think chairs, I think, do have a role in adding to this very complex planning that's going on. I'll say, like, in Canada, I know most of the people watching here are at Canadian universities. We are moving to a relatively uniform plan. Most universities are moving roughly in the same direction, and the fall planning is not politicized in the way that it certainly is in the US and some other places there. So that's one thing that we're largely spared of in Canada. When I look at the online discussion on social media and elsewhere about opening online and stuff there, Canadian universities are somewhat insulated, not entirely, but somewhat insulated from the sort of the clear mistrust and politicization and really, frankly, terrible conflict that's going on. So we're a little better suited, I think, than most, but that doesn't make chairs' roles, I think, any less important. And the role that chairs in contributing to that complexity, I think, is really important.
Okay, thank you. Now, I see that we've got quite a few questions. So I'll just ask both of you to just in 1 minute give me any specific advice you have for incoming chairs that have the wonderful opportunity to become a chair July 1st during this period of time. And I'll ask you, Valene, just very quickly.
So for the incoming chairs, my goodness, I feel for you. This is a tremendously challenging time to be a new chair. And so acknowledge that. Don't feel that you need to be able to understand everything and be able to hit the ground running. That's hard at the best of times, and this is not the best of times. So make sure that you reach out to other department chairs. Try to find somebody that you trust who is an existing department chair a few years in your institution, who knows your institutional context, and or ideally a few. Having a bit of a network is very important. The other thing I'll mention, I was only given a minute, I'm probably wasting or using up a bit more of that, but there's this sort of thinking of don't waste this crisis. This is sort of a political idea that, never let a good crisis go to waste. If you're starting, or even if you're already a department chair, is there something that you'd like to foster or develop in your department that this might present a very unique opportunity for? So perhaps you've always wanted to develop, or maybe you'd like to see more of a team environment in your department. Is there a way that you could foster that through the communication that you're doing and what you're trying to lead? Or if you've always wanted your department to have more attention to teaching and larger program goals and learning outcomes, is there something that you can do on that front? At the same time that you're trying not to waste this crisis, be aware that there's going to be other people at other areas of the university that are also going to not want to waste this crisis. And you need to be very clear that you're protecting what's amazing about your department, because sometimes that kind of thinking can lead to, oh, well, it'd be easier if we amalgamated, or if we cut programs, or this or that. And so you want to make sure that you are clear about what needs to be protected in your department, and a very good advocate for that. And then the last thing I would say is to watch out for the well-being of your department, your faculty, your staff, and yourself. So it's very, very easy to get into a habit of a bowl of ice cream every night, or a glass of wine every night, or working late every night, all these sorts of things. Take care of yourself. Make sure that you're encouraging your faculty and staff to do the same.
And I just add to that, I think particularly for chairs who are just coming in, it may obviously, I'm sure it feels a bit daunting at times. I would emphasize that being a chair is always an ambiguous role. I think even in normal times, now even more so. But chairs never have all the answers. You're always trying to deal with a lot of different things there, and so it's not like the job is completely changed. Obviously, it's become more difficult, more challenging in some ways there. But so it's not, I think it's important not to compare yourself to sort of, previous times there and suggest that normally things would work really well and stuff. They don't necessarily. I think in these crisis times, everyone is adapting. Everyone from the president on down is trying to adapt and making the best decisions they can, often with very limited information. So really all the solutions really are sort of messy, and they're duct taped together and things. And so there's no expectation that you're going to be some sort of perfect administrator that way. In fact, I would say, building a bit on what Valene was saying there, and I don't want to be facetious here, but this is an opportunity because expectations are really low. In a time like this, people are, it's a crisis, everything's going on here and stuff like that, And again, I don't want to be facetious. I don't want to be dismissive of challenges going on here, but it is an opportunity to try some new things, to maybe say, well, maybe we should do it this way, like that. And so I think there's really some opportunities to move ahead there. And I echo what Valene said about putting people first, putting yourself first, taking a break, not overworking there, and then also support. There's a lot of other people at the university there who are there to support you, and so it's not a job you're supposed to do yourself. And just whether you're an experienced chair or a brand new chair, hopefully you know that the most important skill really is knowing when to ask for help and who to ask for help, and that doesn't stop.
Okay, thank you. We've got about 4 questions, and I'm going to be really careful with time so we can get, they're all quite important. The first one, and I'll just toss it out and either one of you can answer it. Some strategies for curbing or managing the reply all email culture.
Do you want me to do this one, Jonathan? Because
Sure, go ahead.
I'm known for my hatred of email, and it's an odd thing to suggest hatred, but it can become very frustrating, especially all the what seems to be unnecessary email. A few things that I have to do is I sometimes will send out an email that I'm like, well, this is, I call it an email in lieu of a meeting, and I could provide a bunch of information. And at the bottom, I say, you know, to ensure you've read this, and if you have any questions, reply to my office coordinator's name is Amanda. I say, reply to Amanda by this date, and if not, she'll follow up with you. You know, don't reply all. I explicitly say, don't reply all. Don't reply to me. Get in touch with Amanda, and then you know, we'll follow up that way. The other thing is my university has started using Microsoft Teams internally, and I've been trying to push people a bit towards this option rather than I know some universities are using Slack. You know, there's different options. What's nice I find about these options as opposed to email is people can just put a little, you know, thumbs up or happy face emoji that they've read something, and they don't have to get back to you. Third suggestion I have on this front is I've actually used a lot of email rules in my approach to email. So there's some email, so anything that's CC'd to me automatically goes to a particular folder, and I look at it when I feel like it. I feel if you really want my attention, you can put me in the to line. You know, there's a few, you know, any listserv email, anything of a particular type goes to a separate folder. So you can use technology, I think, to curate that a little bit. But I do find explicitly saying, you know, please don't reply all to this, or please, and like I'm pretty blunt. I'm like, can we take this over to Teams? This really doesn't need to be an email. And eventually, there's some people that will not be trained on this. I don't know why, but most people are also wanting to cut back on email, and most people are receptive to that.
Okay, thank you. Next question was, how do we handle faculty evaluation when some people are able to get to their research over the summer and others obviously can't, or when there's different capacities to translate to teaching online?
I think that's a very tricky issue that I'm sure a lot of people are encountering, is that particularly for faculty, and not everyone's in the same circumstances, same life circumstances or whatever, depending on their type of research, etc. There's a very different impact of this pandemic and working from home across the faculty ranks. And I guess a couple of projects. One, in terms of sort of formal evaluations and things there, and again, I don't know, you know, it depends on the institution, depends on the collective agreement, depends on the processes and procedures there. Hopefully, the institution gives some guidance on how to apply those in these scenarios. I mean, to me, I think it's very difficult to apply normal standards of productivity now or for the foreseeable future on this. But again, to me, that's usually a collective agreement issue. That's sort of a higher level administrative issue. Again, depends on the institution there. So hopefully there's some guidance in that. But certainly I think anything a chair can do to recognize and help people recognize there's a different impact, I think is crucial. I think where a chair does have perhaps a more specific role is in helping faculty to understand the impact on each other. So I think that's crucial, particularly I think for teaching. I think we're moving clearly into a remote teaching environment. Some faculty are better equipped than others. I think it's really important, I think, for a department and its faculty to understand the different impact of what's going on here, that some people may not be able to teach from home or whatever, they're not familiar, et cetera, there. And ideally, a chair can have some role in helping faculty understand that and help them collaborate together, perhaps working together on developing a course or something like that, perhaps moving service responsibilities around so that some people will be willing to do more. Again, that's not always the case. You can't always persuade people to do things there. But I think simply just making sure faculty are aware that the impact is not equal, that this person has childcare responsibilities, they live in a small apartment, et cetera. They're just not going to be able to do this stuff. You and your big house or whatever, surely you can do a little more that way, and whatever the scenario is there. And again, I think just making sure the faculty are aware of this, calling that to their attention, I think is one way that you can certainly, I think, try and address the differentiated impact on faculty. And then when it comes to sort of more higher level formal evaluation, merit pay, et cetera, going on there, I mean, that's institutional level responsibility, and hopefully there's some guidance on that, and it's going to vary by institution.
Okay. A question regarding reaching out to students. In your experience, are you aware of departments that are reaching out to students in their areas to determine what their concerns are, their experiences, their challenges, so that departments can make more informed decisions and approaches to managing upcoming terms?
Jonathan, do you want to handle this? Because you've got sort of a Board of Governors perspective too.
Sure. I mean, well, I think it's going to depend. I think it depends on the program and the whether if it's a large program. It depends on the culture. It depends on how much the students feel affiliated. The questions I see is strictly about departments reaching out to their students, and that's going to vary. Some students, I think, have a very strong association with their program, their faculty, etc. Others, it's not quite the same there. I think anything that faculty or that chairs can do to try and reach out that way. For example, if there's a student association to reach out to students, I think simply talking to your own students. If you teach a class, emailing them and asking them about their experiences and their things there. So I think really, as I see the question there, every department has at least the power to at least ask students informally in some way. Maybe the institution is giving a more formal support, a way to survey students, a way to do things like that there. But at the very least, I think you can simply ask, if necessary, ask random students simply on what's going on with their effects. What are some issues? What's important to you there? And that might be able to inform departmental decisions. Hopefully, you can develop a little more of a systematic way of asking students and the impact on them. But it's going to vary. And again, it's going to vary by program, because some students feel very attached to their program, to their unit, etc. Others, it's much more varied, and that's going to influence how much they react. But there's nothing stopping you from at least asking, at the very least, random students what's going on, and hopefully making that a little more systematic.
Okay, and I think everybody probably saw the chat that one of the comments was that someone's colleague had the idea of adding a bonus question on his April exam, asking for the students' feedback and concerns, and that was one way that he got quite a bit of information. Sounds like a really interesting idea. And we also see some other feedbacks in the chat too. We have one other question too that I'd like to turn over to initially to Valene. What specific gender and equity related issues and concerns do people need to be considering in this context? The question says, I didn't specifically hear anything directly on these points, but all the faculty in my specific department are women, racial minorities, and or gender or sexual minorities.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that question. I'm really glad to hear that question because it is something I do want to speak more about that. There's a few things that can be a particular challenge for. I'm going to look at the faculty level in particular with respect to women and minorities in academia. The first is looking a bit more at women. There can be a lot more personal life pressures that are creating challenges on their ability to complete their jobs. The data really indicate that even when there's 2 people at home and 2 people remote working, it's still women that typically, not always, but typically are taking on the lion's share of a lot of the care duties and a lot of the domestic responsibilities, and that can be something that needs to be considered. The same thing with care work beyond children, and so that is something that I think we need to be aware of. For women and racial minorities and gender or sexual minorities, I think there's also the fact that quite often minorities in academia are asked to do more things in terms of committee work, in terms of work for students. And so there can be a lot more demands on their time, either things that are really clearly seen, like I'm a member of whatever committee, or even just unseen work, such as students being willing to reach out to them a lot more. I know just from discussions with colleagues that people are much more likely to cry in my office than they are to cry in my male colleagues' offices. So there's this sort of dimension that there's a time burden. There can be sort of an energy burden as well. Again, these are broad generalizations. They're not necessarily true for every specific individual. But I think we need to be considering a few things going forward. The first is that, and this relates to a question that was asked earlier, that people are going to have very different abilities to work their careers over the next half year or beyond. For some people, just adjusting to remote learning and teaching for the fall is going to be more than a full-time job. For other people, it'll be relatively easy. Some people will be able to get research done on top of that. Some people won't be able to do any of that. And so I think we need to be very aware of individuals' contexts and think about these things in terms of assigning workloads and assigning responsibilities, in terms of future salary review considerations, impacts on tenure and promotion times. And then I think also at the department level, well, what can we do? I think we can kind of try to reach out to individuals and say, is there anything that can be done at the department level to be helpful to you? Are there deadlines that could be pushed? Are there some things that, if you need more time, would a TA help? Would having an RA to do a bibliography for you so that you can work on something else help? What are some of the small things that you might be able to make available to help people? And this is really an individual one-on-one discussion. Just because somebody is in a particular group doesn't mean that they don't have that they have particular challenges or they don't. But I think it's worth asking people, what do you need and how can the department support you?
I'd like to just add quickly to that I mean, a particular vulnerable population we haven't talked much about here is graduate students. We've talked about a bit about, I think, students meaning undergraduates. And for graduate students, who would more likely to be usually women and minorities as well, that's really a vulnerable population, particularly their research students and so on. Their research has come to a halt. There's issues about their scholarships, their funding, and things going on there. Again, that's particularly vulnerable population, I think. And again, chairs can't solve everything. I think we don't want to imply in this webinar that chairs are kind of the solution to everything. They can solve all the problems there. But again, they've got a real perspective there, I think, to also make sure that graduate students don't fall through the cracks. So I think that's another particularly vulnerable population in all of this.
Okay, thank you. As we're now moving up to the hour, being 1 o'clock, just a couple of comments. I noticed that we've had some questions about the surveys and willingness to share some of the student survey questions. Since I will have this information, I hope you won't mind if I reach out to you, and if you're able to share that, we can find a way to get that information out to the people that are participating in this webinar. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. It would make sense not to recreate it. As we come to the end, I want to really thank all of you for giving up the hour today in a tricky time. I want to thank the presenters, Valene and Jonathan, very much for being willing to do this for the first time and be willing to sort of share and be open to questions. And I want to again thank Tara for all of the support that made this happen. So thank you very much. This will be recorded and you will have an opportunity to view it later and share it with your colleagues. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yes. Thanks very much. And thank you, Kathleen.